Running Sentences presents All Hail Zip Zog, Part 4, A Game of Puzzles. Rufus and Finn find themselves going through a maze of puzzles, all so Zip Zog can prove that he is actually a god. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, incidences, and situations within this story are completely fictional and imagined by the author. Any resemblance to real people, incidences, events, situations, and or fictional ones is purely coincidental. Copyright 2022, Michael Harre. All rights reserved. The pathway from the top of the plateau that they'd been on was tiny. It made Finn and Rufus form a single line as they circled around it. Then this giant rock stuck out all important-like from the ground, as if it was something to be admired. And unfortunately for the couple, the top of the plateau sat some 90 feet up in the air, so clambering down was taking them some time. They would exhaustedly reach the bottom and into a landing area at the base, and were stopped once again by a gate with a sign, this one saying "Stop and wait." There were 2 tree stumps near the sign, so they both wound up sitting down to collect themselves and their breath, which did not last long as Zip Zog appeared by the sign. Your first challenge will be to be working together to solve a puzzle. This involves leopards and lots of running from one side to another. Don't worry, the leopards are mostly friendly. And remember, you can get hurt, but you won't die, per se. But if you do fail, you will have I may have some serious reconsiderations to be doing about profits and so on, and, well, maybe some curses to go along to be thrown at you. In a blink of light he was gone again, and the creaky sign that had blocked the way forward began opening. It was going slowly, but it was opening. Rufus wasn't sure if he wanted to get up to find out what Zip Zog had meant by leopards. He probably meant leopards, but did he really mean leopards? Maybe it was a fluffy stuffed animal? It didn't seem likely, and Finn was already getting up from her tree stump. She moved over to the gate, and then vanished from view. Rufus was up on his feet in a second, and hurried over, only to feel his own feet suddenly not on solid ground anymore. He found himself on a slide, heading downward in a spiral, catching various glimpses of a chest-like board with 2 big cubby containers on either side of them. In the middle, he was sure he could see a leopard or 2 lounging about, though they may have been glaring at one another or something. He couldn't really tell as he kept going round and round until he was spat out. When the slide was done, he'd mostly come to a stop on a platform, and Rufus took a second to collect himself before getting up to look around even further. Finn was standing by an edge on this platform, and he just stopped himself from hurrying over to try and pull her back away from it. It didn't look like she was ready to fall off, but that fear crept up on him. But she was an independent woman after all, and she would have figured the risks, and, well, he didn't want to feel domineering in keeping her safe. Finn, that edge, She looked down, and then over at him, taking a step back. Happy? If it keeps us from getting hurt, yes. She smiled as he came towards her. So, what have we got? What do we see? From what I can see, it looks like a matching game. The 2 big boards with the wrong thing on the other side, and pieces needed to get to the other side. The center is guarded by 2 big leopard cats. Simple yet complicated from what we can tell. They looked at the 2 big cats lounging at the center of the board. Neither of the leopards looked pleased to be near one another. So our only problem then is the big cats. Know anything about them? No, you? I think they're solitary, but I did read that from the internet, and, well, you can't trust most of what you read on the internet. They stared for a few seconds more before she turned and began looking for a way down on the right side of this platform that they stood upon. He took to the left side, but the second they separated, a siren sounded, and they found themselves with a wall between them. Rufus had jumped at the sound and spun about, but Finn seemed calm as she found a gate that had opened near the edge on her side and headed down it already. He turned and found that there was one on his side as well, and very close to the edge. It seemed like this was the only way to go, and so he followed it. The path took him directly to the left side of the game board, where he found etched items on the ground. He looked over at this, items stored on his side of the cubby, on the wall behind the board, and found that none of them matched the images etched onto the ground. These things in the cubbies were also locked behind cages, with a button near each one, and then there was 3 floors going up. So I think we need to trade. I will toss an item over to you to see what happens. He looked over to her side to see which seemed like his, but had the items that he would need. She had gone over to the closest box and pressed the button. The cage that guarded this box opened, and the sound of one opening up behind him caused him to turn and look. It was up on the 3rd floor of this cubby wall, and he had a sinking feeling that he should be up there and grabbing the item. But he stayed where he was and looked back to Finn, who was carrying the item slowly over towards him. It suddenly vanished. The sound of the cage closing behind him helped put the whole thing together. Shit, that didn't go as I expected. It's a game, and you didn't expect there to be some challenges? Well, I'd hoped it would be simple. Sorry for hoping that. A shock shot up both of their legs from the ground, causing a bit of hopping about as both moved to get away from the sensation. When the slight pain and tingling went away, Rufus got close, but not too close, towards the middle section of the game board. He did not want to get near enough for the leopards to suddenly grab at him. Which item did you pick, by the way? It was a cube that had some fancy etchings on it. Why? He pointed towards the carvings on the ground that were now behind him. She tried to look over, but he gave up and turned to look at the ones on her side. She studied them for a few seconds before looking up at him. I think we need the things that look like the ground drawings. For example, I have one that appears to be a screen monitor, or, a computer monitor as the one closest to me. I saw that one on the cubby board, I think. Okay, great. But when you go over to press the button, don't pick it up right away. I need to find out which cubby it goes to on my side. I think we need to trade items, right? She nodded and headed off for the box to press the button. A few seconds later, a cubby box on the 2nd story of the wall opened. With all of his might, Rufus hurried up the stairs towards this 2nd level of the game and this cubby wall. He feared that the box would snap shut before he would get there, but arrive he did at the 2nd level. His feet carried him across the platform that stood in front of this 2nd row of box spaces, a 2nd row of cubby boxes with things in them. The metal door had not yet slammed back into place, and he was soon in front of it. Inside was one of the cube-like boxes with things etched and written upon it. "I'm grabbing the thing from my side." The shout reached him, and he instantly grabbed the box with the word that she wasn't going to need this item from his side, but, well, he probably needed to get it out anyway, and with this in hand he firmly turned, and then jumped back down the 7 feet so that he could get back to the game board. He landed with a thump, and kept himself in a crouched position to try and lessen the blow from the landing. He didn't know if it helped or not, but it was something that felt sort of right to do, and when in doubt, one should trust their own bodies and emotions, right? He shook his head as he stood up and began hurrying his way across, as close as he dared, to the middle section. The 2 leopards seemed to have gained some great interest into what was going on, and had gotten up, and were now standing in the way of the board. And since Rufus figured he was close enough, as he was going to get anyway, to this center area, with all of his strength, he decided to toss the cube across to her side. It made it halfway, before the leopard jumped up and batted it back towards him. The cube landed at his feet, with him looking between it and the leopard, who seemed to be grinning and quite happy to play. "Oh, come on, that's not fair. How is that fair? That's not fair." Finn had managed to get the computer monitor across with little trouble, and this caused Rufus to panic, as he feared having to do all of this all over again. So he kicked the cube at his feet, hoping it would have enough energy. It, however, landed in front of the leopard, who playfully grabbed it and began to shred it to pieces. It was soon gone, and the monitor remained where it had been. And not one to let a chance go by, Rufus hurried over towards it, grabbed it, and then took it over to where the carvings on the ground were. and then placed it on top of the similar-looking thing. And once in place, it lit up the ground under it and made a chime sound. We did it? I guess we used the cube blocks to keep the cats happy while we getting our stuff. Finn nodded, and the two set about getting the right things. For Finn, there was a keg, a stool, a steel mixing container. There was also a weird mirror that seemed to be reflecting alcoholic drinks in it, but there were no alcoholic drinks in front of it, and then there was also a flask. On Rufus's side, however, he needed a hard drive, a mouse, a small mountable server computer, and a bunch of cable wires to go with his monitor. It took them a little while, but they soon accomplished the feat, with the big cat happy to rip up the cubes that were given to them while they passed their objects between one another. The second this last piece was put down, 2 gates showed up on their respective sides of the game board, which they went to a bit slowly, having just run around for a little while in what was turning into a humid morning in what appeared to be a rainforest. Rufus walked the path that presented itself after the first game. It felt like he was sort of wandering back and forth without aim in this pathway, but he came to a stop when a podium appeared with a pair of pants to it. They looked like regular pants, and so he took them and put them on since he wasn't wearing any. He wondered if this was going to be their reward for beating the first game, or if getting his clothes back was just the general reward as he followed the path further. Then opened up to a new platform which sat on a rock. Here, though, was a gate, and what looked to be a mechanical box in front of it. There was nowhere else to go but inside of it, and so inside he went, and found a set of controls and lots of screens. And beyond that was a game board, with a similar machine across the way from his. On this board were several castle-like towers that looked similar to chess pieces. They looked similar to rook chess pieces, towers of sorts. Also across from him now appeared to be Finn, who seemed to be sitting in a similar box, with a massive window. She waved, and then moved to tend to her controls. He likewise looked at what was in front of him, as Zip Zog appeared near one of the levers. Your second task stands in front of you. Okay, what is it, Zip Zog? First you work together, and now you must work to take the other down. There will be a loser and a forfeit for this one. Explain the game already. So impatient. It's simple. You have a wrecking ball and must use it to knock over your opponent's tower. The first to knock over 3 towers wins. But you may also exit your wrecker at any time to reassemble any towers your opponent has knocked over. And your opponent may also continue to try and wreck your towers as this is going on. And, it's pretty simple, easy, and go to it. Zip Zog disappeared and the controls before him came to life, as did a rumble that made his feet shake. It was what he imagined would feel like to be in one of the machines that were actually designed to tear down buildings with wrecking balls. But with Finn's machine already making moves forward unsteadily, he didn't have time to worry or think about such things. Her wrecking ball came forward, swinging from its arm, going to and fro with ease. As he put his hands on his controls, though, he saw that the ball had a lot of momentum to it, and as her wrecking ball went, it tapped into one of her towers, knocking it down a little bit. It was still mostly up, but a little screen appeared next to one of the control towers, knocking off half of a point from one of her 6 towers. It was then that he knew he would need to be extra careful with how things move. I lost half a point for that. I need a timeout. I didn't know how this stuff works. Her voice piped in from a speaker to his right, and he saw a button to a speaker that would let him respond. He pressed the button. How do you think I feel? I don't know how to operate these things either. With that, he let go of the button, grabbed what appeared to be a joystick, and gently moved it forward with the machine responding to his commands. Though the arm with the ball also responded, as it came out from its hiding spot and swung about towards the game board. He instantly let go of the joystick and watched the ball swing about, cutting through the air near one of his towers. His luck was decent, as the ball did not wreck or touch any of them on his side. Now he just needed to figure out how to move about the place without knocking over any of them, as there were 2 on his left, and then 2 on his right, and, of course, 2 in his center. If he moved too much, without a doubt, he'd probably knocked them all over. He noted that Finn was out of her vehicle rushing about to fix her tower that she'd slightly toppled, and he began to try and get the thing to move without causing any damage. He worked the joystick furiously, moving it slightly here and there with minuscule movements that felt like he was doing absolutely nothing. The machine did move, though, in a slow, lumbering way that just crawled along. Rufus found himself staring at the ball on his chain in front of him, hoping that it was not going to suddenly move about. Though that is exactly what it began doing, because once a machine begins moving, the ball begins to transfer its energy. "You bastard!" Marcus reached over and pressed the talk button once again. "Hey, all's fair in love and war. This game is now a war between us, and I'm not one to just let people win. I'll take what advantage I can get." He pressed forward on his machine's joystick, a little harder than he intended to, and promptly knocked over a tower. "Shit!" Finn's voice promptly piped in. "Ha!" Rufus could only shake his head. He did not press his button to respond, as he looked about and saw an exit downward sign next to him, with a ladder going in that direction. He did not waste any time, as he clambered out of his chair and mounted the ladder so that he could get down. He would drop onto the checkerboard-patterned game board below and looked around. Finn was busy trying to move her machine again, with the ball bouncing all around the area. If she wasn't careful, she would probably knock over another tower. But he didn't have time to worry about her, as he looked over to his right, where his messed-up brick facade of a tower once stood. He went over looking about for some way to rebuild it. Aside from having a red holographic box with the words "Warning, Destroyed Tower" around it, there was nothing. So he picked up a brick near his foot and placed it back into the tower. A second later, this holographic changed from red to blue, with the words "Being Rebuilt, Now Shining." On the good side, that was fucking simple. The tower had taken to rebuilding itself, and he did not want to wait around to see if Finn had gotten control of her machine yet, and ran towards the ladder to his own. The climb up the ladder back onto the machine was taking a bit of time, as it was a long way to go back upwards. Paused halfway to reset himself and catch a glimpse of what was going on. Finn had accidentally knocked over one of her towers again, and was back out of her wrecker, sliding down the ladder. And he swore he could see Zip Zog sitting off to the side on some bench above the game board, looking down on the whole thing while eating popcorn. Rufus let out a little sigh and shook his head as he resumed heading upwards. Back inside and in front of the controls, Rufus froze up, as he did not want to move for fear of knocking over another tower that he just rebuilt. Finn was struggling to get her tower back up, and her wrecking ball was very close to another one of her towers. The second she moved her wrecker, it would likely fall, maybe. But could he win on a default of not really moving and letting her wreck her towers? He saw that she was gone once again, heading upward into her wrecker, and waited until she was inside. He pressed the button to call her. "Hey. What do you want, enemy of mine?" "Do you think these towers really look like towers?" "What are you talking about, Rufus? What do you mean?" "I was just thinking they're kind of reminding me of old churches. You know, the big Gothic things planted all over Europe, and because what else did they have to do during the Middle Ages but build crazy churches and, stuff." "Maybe, but what does it have to do with anything?" "Think about it. A god wants me to knock down religion and start a new one, bring it back, whatever. And what are we doing here? Knocking things down and building them back up? Sounds similar, right?" "Well, yes, it does." She'd already begun advancing her wrecker again, this time ignoring the fact that she knocked down 2 of her own towers. "Hey, don't just charge forward. Listen to me. I have a way out of wrecking towers." Her advance in her machine was not stopping. He grunted as he pushed forward his own controls, the wrecking ball starting to sway to and fro, and wondered if he could time it just right to knock her own wrecking ball away. Unlikely, but he had God on his side. but he didn't think he really did. And it was not like he was counting on that fact either, as Zip Zog did whatever he wanted, and rarely did anything that didn't benefit him. Rufus thought about that as the machines made their way rumbling towards one another. Both wrecking balls were moving back and forth as the machines went. The last towers that were still up were in front of him, and likewise, it was the same for Finn. He let off the joystick, sending the ball forward as she continued on. This caught her off guard, and she tried to react by stopping as well, and this caused her ball to swing forward. The two balls swung forward, with Rufus's ball in the lead as it swung past, just missing as her ball went by. Then, as they decided that they'd had enough of going that way, they came backwards. But these balls, these chain and balls, did not miss each other this time, as they caught on one another and began tying themselves up in knots. "Look what you've done! How are we supposed to knock down towers now? If I lose something good because of this, I will be very cross with you. You are very into this game." "I don't get to play many games, and I may have a bit of a competitive spirit when it comes to this stuff. But still, come on! Why'd you have to go and get the wreckers tied together?" She attempted to pull her machine away, but this caused the chain holding the balls to pull at one another. The further she backed up, the more the chains pulled, and with neither wrecking ball looking like they wanted to separate, the chains tightened and strained on their machines. The game is already over. Zip Zog, come out of hiding. We tied. We don't have a victor for your game. We understand that you want to knock down religion. Finn kept the chain pulling, tightening as Zip Zog appeared next to him. "I could repair everything once she breaks it, you know." "Yes, or we could just move on. You recognize that we don't need to completely tear down religion to get people to your new ways of religiosity or something like that. Look, it's, we get that you want to tear down churches and build new, but we don't need to do that. We see what you're trying to do." The god considered this, shaking his head from side to side, as the thoughts tumbled about inside what Rufus hoped was a mind. Meanwhile, the chains finally snapped, sending the two balls crashing into the last of the towers. Adding to the whole thing, the snaking chain whipped about, and wrecked all but one tower on either side. The screen that had been keeping count flashed red, and then victory, and then loss, all at the same time as it tried to figure out who had won and who had lost. "I can accept that if you recognize that some teardown of the old ways of religion must happen, then we can go forward. We will show them the light, Zip Zog, and how their ways are wrong, and tear down a few old ideologies, perhaps. Okay? Is that good with you, Gon?" Zip Zog nodded, and then in a flash of light, things changed. Rufus blinked and found himself standing next to Finn again, as she was also blinking and looking around. They were on a platform, with a gate before them again. Zip Zog also stood near this gate, looking rather pleased. "My challenge to get you to figure out how to move my new religion forward is a grand success. You now know that we need to knock down the old religious ways, while not entirely doing that. Anyway, please move forward to your final challenge. Please." The god was gone again, and the gate once again swung open. The dirt path they found themselves on now swung and trailed its way through a deep section of rainforest. There were lots of clicking insects that were making noise, and Rufus kept an eye out in case any animal decided to jump out at them. Finn was ahead of him, lost in thought, and so he, being protective of his new girlfriend, kept himself extra hyper ready for anything that might pop up. "Do you think we really won?" Her voice and his unpreparedness caused him to jump a bit. The last thing he'd been expecting had happened, and he could feel his heart in his chest, giving a few extra thumps at this. I convinced him that us knocking down the towers wasn't to get this god what he wanted, so yes, but I also made a promise that I would change and tear down people's minds about religious texts so that they could get a new gospel. So maybe, sort of, She stopped and turned to stare at him. The look told him that she still wasn't completely sure about any of this, but, well, it would be a bit silly to not believe at least some of what was going on at this point. He decided it was the fact that she had only lifted one of her eyebrows in a questioning manner instead of both, and a look of incredulousness. "Oh, look, more clothes!" On a podium that was near the path sat some shirts, mostly colorful ones, that had Rufus wondering if the god had expected Finn to win. After all, weren't colorful things mostly for women and those of a gay persuasion, or was that just his mind going to stereotypes? Did it matter one iota? It was just a shirt after all, and so he put it on to feel a little more comfortable in this muggy weather. Once that was done, the two shuffled off down the path, which came to a short end after they'd gotten them, and led them straight to a sidewalk. One that was right before the grounds of a white chapel church-like building, with an overgrown lawn spreading all about it, and a cemetery off to the side of the place. It felt all religious and quaint-like to the T. A picket white fence that surrounded this place blocked them from going any further. It had a sign illuminated that entry was not allowed until the rules had been explained. Rufus wondered what was coming next. Why, a church? Well, had they not just gone through tearing down a church to rebuild it? He worried as Zip Zog appeared behind the gate with a flourish of smoke and a bit of trumpet music behind him. "Welcome to our last trial. I expect you didn't think you'd get through all of this so quickly. Well, it's short because holding time still is not an easy task, and the sooner you're done, the better for all of us. Now, the next game involves making a church nice." "What do you mean, Mr. God? What do you want us to do?" To this, Zip Zog grinned and spread his arms out. "I need an example of what my future holy home will look like, and who is more perfect to do it than a couple that will bring my name to the people. Have fun." He was gone again, and the gate sign disappeared, leaving them in front of an all too quaint sight. "Are we interior designers now?" Maybe, Finn? I guess so. Shall we wander about the outside before we go in and see what awaits us?" Rufus moved to unhitch the gate and let them inside the grounds. The tall grass swayed about them as they walked over the overgrown path. To their right sat the cemetery that they'd seen before, and one that they could barely make out the headstones of. Rufus did not want to go over there, for fear that Zip Zog had placed Rufus's headstone down with the date of his death on it. It would be a very godlike thing to do, especially a mischievous one, and, well, he just did not want to see that. That would be the last thing he needed right now, and it would shoot his nerves straight to the moon. So Rufus decided to concentrate on the grass, which would have to be chopped down just a bit, but there was something nice about having grass that was long to walk through. It felt nice as they went through it and towards the side of the church. "We're going to do away with that building, I think. It's too quaint." "What do you have in mind to replace it with, Finn?" "Well, if you had to ask me, I think it would be sort of modern library-like-esque." "Library-like?" "A place to question things, to read, to find oneself. And, well, to get help without pressure to do the whole pay up or you will go to hell thing." He stopped walking as she continued on around towards the left side of the building. His eyes followed her movement as he thought about what she said. It made sense. They didn't really want to be a religion and to have a modern-esque building. Maybe it was a library, maybe not. It would be a good idea to have something different. You know, you might be much better at this prophet thing with the thoughts like that. No, thank you. I am too independent, and your God apparently does not like me. How can you say that? She turned and waved her hands around, trying to signal all over. I got us into this mess. Does that spell out, quote, like, end quote, to you? Maybe it does in a Sundra style of way. No, and why are you throwing in Japanese manga style terms? Rufus shrugged, and she was off once again, walking around this white board building that was narrow and confined looking from the outside. It was a church, and it had all the hallmarks of one as they headed towards the back. The back of the church was unspectacular as one might expect. It was simple, with a picturesque stained glass image shimmering in some light. Other than that, there was nothing but rolling fields beyond the place, and they came to a stop just to look at the two things, trying to figure out if there was any good to looking at either of them. Both looked nice, but beyond a glance they did not hold much attention. "So what do you think of the stained glass, Rufus?" "It's nice, but, I feel like it's sort of claimed by certain religions as their thing, and we're trying to get away from that image, so I don't think it would be good to keep it around." She nodded, and they kept walking onwards, and found themselves approaching the right side of this church area, where the cemetery was located. The long grass waved at them as they stomped through it towards this graveyard, which Rufus had been hoping to avoid. Cemeteries were in fact creepy. Well, not entirely. There were just spots for human remains, and sometimes animal remains, under the ground. But it also felt weird to step on the ground where one had been so carefully placed to rest. I don't think we should have a cemetery for our church." "What? Why not? They're a nice place to pay respect." "They are, but they're also old-fashioned, and well, I think and they might scare away some younger people who don't care about such things." She began to pull him towards the cemetery, which was guarded by a long, stone, low fence. Her pulling was insistent, and he did his best to keep trying to hold himself back from going in there, so she stopped. "Are you afraid of cemeteries?" "Yes and no. My main fear being Zip Zog, in his ever mischievous manner, has put a headstone with my name on it and death date on it in there. He may probably have done the same thing for you, because he's definitely like that." She considered this for a second, and then nodded. "Yes, graveyards are very old school, and we are new school religion, so perhaps we can do away with them." She kept a hold of his arm as she began trekking away from the graves towards the church entrance. The trip around the place ended with them in the front door of the establishment. It was a simple thing, made of wood and painted white. It felt like it belonged to a church of this size and fitted well, which is exactly why they went right past it without a thought about what they might need to do differently. The doorway beyond brought them into a greeting area with its own little pulpit for a preacher to stand behind and welcome in his flock. Rufus looked it over with a critical eye. It looked gaudy to have such things next to the door to the inner church. Who had thought it was such a good idea, as the few times he had been to a church, no such things had presented themselves. To his left he found seating and a closed-off area for mothers and noisy children, and to his right a small little congregation spot for a priest to come out with to his devoted little following of other priests or choir boys as they went up the main aisle towards the main pulpit. Somewhere around here, he figured, should be a set of stairs, though. "What do you think of all of this?" The little pulpit should go, otherwise it all seems rather standard. We should probably keep the mother's room area, maybe, and an area for priests to, congregate away from the audience. What I want to know, though, is where is the stairs to go upstairs? Why do you want to know that? But having spied what looked to be a hidden staircase in the extra closed-off section of seating, he merely pointed towards it. "Come and see what I hope is up there." As he had hoped, when he opened the door to the balcony overlooking the church proper, there sat a proper organ piano, along with a few rows of chairs for a choir, but those chairs were not what interested him. He'd gone right over to the organ and sat down in front of it with a grin. Rufus, do you play the organ?" "Never been near one in my life, but I've always wanted to see what would happen if I pressed the keys." He wiggled his fingers about and then did so, and was greeted by an eerie, sad quiet, where there should have been at least a groan of noise. Finn came over as he pressed more keys, with nothing happening. "It would help if you turned it on." She flipped a switch near the keyboard, and as he pressed down on the key, the organ let out a protesting wah noise, to which Rufus let go of the key and quickly flipped the switch off. Well, that was a mistake. That was weird. I say we don't need such things for our sure-to-fail church thingy. They're nice, but, that noise was weird. Finn shook her head and moved over towards the railing that ended the balcony and overlooked the church below. He joined her a second later and looked down at the pews and pulpit and looked over at the very simple yet religious place. "What does this make you feel?" "Homely, in a terrible way. It's so simple and homespun that if you came here you'd probably walk out as a farmer despite being a lawyer, or some sort of madness like that. So do we do away with the pews and pulpit and here and replace them with what? Bean chairs that are bags, or what?" His imagination took a hold of this, as he saw everyone sitting around peacefully, drinking from cups with some sort of punch in them. Then the cops and the police breaking in and arresting the whole lot of them. Bean chairs sound like a bad idea. Only because everyone would accuse us of being a cult, because it sort of is the first thing one thinks of unless it's kids in bean chairs. She laughed and nodded yes to that. "What do we do then? Metal folding chairs? Tables? What's your plan, oh Prophet One?" "No idea. But what I feel like we should have doesn't involve pews, and I thought you wanted a place to encourage thinking. How would you make it happen?" "Rooms, lots of rooms, and priests who spend time talking and listening to small groups of people in said rooms. I want a community of people, helping one another, not sort of a preacher preaching everything and everyone just listening to what this one man says, or woman, for that matter." "Yeah, you definitely should have been the prophet. Shall we go back down to the main floor?" She nodded yes, and they both headed back for the stairs. This led them back down, and the two strolled out among the pews, heading towards the back of the church. Rufus felt himself feeling more and more homely as he walked about the place, which wasn't a bad thing, as plenty of people live simple lives, but it was not for him. No, this place, if they were ever to get a church, would need to be a more modern building. And they continued to walk, even though the building was small, and soon had them at the back of this place, where there was a door next to the pulpit area. The only thing back there, when they opened the door, was an office, which, while nice, also felt dated and homely. It would be a nice space for a priest who liked simple lives and things like that, and got along well with folks from the Midwest United States, where the people might proclaim that simple is better, all while using the latest technology and complaining about better days of yesteryear. But Rufus paid no mind to that. They were people who had their ways and were set with them. Getting to the new ways would not be easy for those type of people, and yet he found himself challenged with doing exactly that. "We do need an office for the church." "Yeah, but just about anything would be better than this little closet space." "Oh, yeah, agreed. It's settled then. This place has to go. All of it." For some reason that he could not fathom, because it was silly, he stuck his hand out to shake with Finn, and she took it and shook it, like it was a deal being completed, yet there was no deal being completed, and it was just them agreeing with one another that this place would not do. But with the handshake completed, they turned and headed out. The two exited the building and came to a stop on the front lawn, and then glancing about for Zip Zog, but he was not there, so they continued walking towards the picket fence. What else was there to do? They were going to tear down this whole church, so rearranging it to look nice wasn't really that appealing to them. Besides, they didn't have any powers that would magically change the way things looked. Rufus had tried a few things, like waving his hands while walking through the building, and at the front door before stepping out, but no changes had occurred, and Zip Zog suddenly sat on the grass near the gate, looking rather bored. We're done here, God person." "Oh, I don't see any changes. What did you two do? Did you do something? Well, you didn't show us how to make any changes. And we also figured that this place just simply would not do. We need a modern-looking place, similar to a library, but open and inviting. Zip Zog nodded and then waved his hand, and the building was suddenly gone and replaced by a new one. This one was a bit like a library or modern art museum, with plenty of windows and brick, and it felt like it was open to the world. Similar to that? Yes, we need plenty of rooms inside, and space for books. This is going to be a place for questioning things, like potentially gods. Rufus took a quick glance over at Zip Zog, who pulled an unsure face at that last remark, but let it slide with another wave of his hands. Things didn't look like they'd changed, but the insides probably had. The problem was, if he trusted this god to make the actual changes, or was this god going to pull some kind of joke or mischievous prank on them again? Was it worth the risk? I think now might be a good time to return to society, though. It's pretty much set, the inside. I don't think you guys need to view it. I mean, I put what you needed in there. Well, when things... I'll build up a building plan for you and, well, I'll zap it to your technology somehow. Anyway, my strength to hold time still hasn't been tested in eons, and I fear it will fail soon. This might cause the creatures in this wonderful rainforest to come find you as food. So if you will please go through the gate to the door, it would be greatly appreciated. The two chose not to question this because it sounded like a horrible fate to befall them if it was true, and they just headed for the picket white gate fence and popped through. The church and everything suddenly disappeared behind them. They took a few steps forward, and suddenly a door popped into view right in front of them. The two jumped back a bit at the sight, and once they collected their wits, Finn reached for the door handle. Rufus, this has been a very odd experience. Yeah, and it's all thanks to a god who probably doesn't like us all that much. I can hear you. They turned and offered plaintive grins to say sorry, but not sorry, and to their surprise he was holding a little golden statue of a church for them to take. Rufus tentatively reached out for it. A little something to remember all of this by, because you might decide it was all a dream, and I did say I was going to reward you. So, reward! He was then gone, and with the golden statue in hand, Rufus turned, as Finn opened the door and walked through. On the other side, they found themselves entering Ryan's apartment living room, as if through the front door. This change sparked confusion in both of their minds, as they'd gone from a rainforest to seeing a sleeping female figure of Ryan on his couch. Why were they here and not back at Finn's place? Rufus looked about for Zip Zog, but the god did not appear, and Ryan, with a sudden yawn and stretch, woke up and then sat up. He/she blinked upon seeing them and the golden statue, and then checked the surrounding area. Am I still in my apartment, right? As far as we can tell, yes. Ryan, why are you sleeping on your couch? The female version of Ryan got up, scratching her leg and then shaking her head, trying to put it all together. Did I leave the door unlocked or something? Your door automatically locks, Ryan. She/he began to head for the small nearby kitchen and came to a stop after thinking about what had been said to a him/her. Oh yeah, as for the couch, well, I found it more comfortable in this body to sleep on soft leather. Do women need special beds? No, Ryan, they do not. Poop. Well, that makes that weird. Well, I guess I'm just not getting used to this body anytime soon. Has, your god Zip Zog said anything about changing me back? Finn and Rufus both shook their head no, as Ryan continued into the kitchen. Do you two want coffee or something to drink? Yes, a coffee, please. Rufus shook his head. No, thanks, I should head out for work. He realized that the golden statue of a church was still in his hands and decided to place it down on a nearby coffee table. Ryan, however, had re-emerged from the kitchen and stood there looking confused. "How did you two get in if the door is locked?" "Take a wild guess, Ryan, at which mischievous being put us here when he could have put us anywhere, really, and maybe back at Finn's place." "Oh, Zip Zog. Great. Wait, are you two a thing now?" They nodded yes, and Ryan excitedly moved forward towards a nearby desk with lots of loose papers on it. "Great! Maybe I can make a hymn about this. Yes, that will really help sell the idea of making me a preacher. Yes. A preacher who comes up with songs and sings and, well, something." As if on cue, Zip Zog appeared, smiling that work was being done about his religion. "Very good, Ryan. You've learned your lesson well. Now back to your body you go, unless, Ryan shook his head no, furiously, at the thought of staying in a woman's body. And with a sigh, Zip Zog nodded. End of part 4 of All Hail Zip Zog. Thank you for listening.